Hey everyone, welcome back to the Haunted Corner. I'm Ashton, and today we're celebrating our 100th episode. I honestly can't believe we're here. I can't believe that I've written, recorded, edited 100 episodes. It feels like yesterday that I was at Disneyland in September of 2022 planning the podcast, and then 1 month later, on Halloween, I released my first episode. So it's really only fitting that episode 100 is all about Disney. The history, the fun facts, and maybe some things you might not know, including what happens if you die at a Disney park, some rumored haunted locations, and a lot more. I'm really excited, so let's get into it. The mastermind behind Disney was a man named Walt Disney. He was born on December 5th of 1901. When he was a baby, the family moved to Marceline, Missouri, which is said to have been the inspiration for Main Street USA and Disneyland. Walt took an interest in animation and cartoons at a fairly young age. After the family moved to Kansas City, he began taking classes at the Kansas City Art Institute and College School of Design. This was also where Disney developed a love for trains. His uncle, Mike Martin, was a train engineer who worked the route between Fort Madison, Iowa, and Marceline. Later, Walt got a summer job with the railroad selling snacks and newspapers to travelers. In 1917, the family moved back to Chicago, and Walt attended McKinley High School, where he took photographs, made drawings for the school paper, and studied cartooning on the side, because he was, hopefully, eventually, going to achieve a job as a newspaper cartoonist. That's what he wanted to do. But these dreams had to be placed on hold as World War I hit. When Walt was 16, he dropped out of school to join the army, but he was turned away for being underage. So he decided to join the Red Cross instead and was sent to France for a year to drive an ambulance. He moved back to the U.S. in 1919. And when he returned to the U.S., he found occasional employment as a draftsman and inker in commercial art studios. And this is where he met UB Iwerks. From there, Walt worked at the Kansas City Film Ad Company, where he made commercials based on cutout animation. While working at the ad company, Walt began experimenting with a camera and doing hand-drawn animations. He also met a man named Fred Harmon at that time, and he decided to open his own animation company. Walt recruited Fred Harmon as his first employee. He later brought in Fred's brother and UB Iwerks. They initially made a deal with a local theater in Kansas City to screen their cartoons, which they called Laugh-O-Grams. They compiled a series of 7-minute fairy tales that were a combination of animation and live action, and they called these cartoons Alice in Cartoonland. By 1923, however, the studio had mounting debt and Walt Disney was forced to declare bankruptcy. At that time, they kind of needed a fresh start, so Walt and his brother Roy and cartoonist UB Iwerks moved to Hollywood and started their own company called Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio. The name quickly was changed at the suggestion of Roy to Walt Disney Studios, and that's where this story really begins. Walt Disney Studios' first deal was with a New York distributor named Margaret Winkler. The goal was to distribute their previous Alice cartoons, but they also invented a character called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. They eventually broke from their distributors and created cartoons featuring Mickey Mouse and his friends, starting with Silly Symphonies, which featured Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, and Pluto. And around this time, Walt dove headfirst into movie production, releasing his first full-length animated film in 1937, which was called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This would be his first of over 100 feature films. In 1939, a new campus for Walt Disney Animation Studios opened in Burbank, California. Things went well for the first few years, but in 1941, the animators went on strike, and many of them resigned. but this was far from the end of Walt Disney Animation Studios. One of the most popular cartoons that came out was called Flowers and Trees. It was the first to be produced in color and to win an Oscar. With his rising success in the movie industry, Walt started to see the potential of television as a popular entertainment medium and was one of the first to produce programs directly for it, including the Mickey Mouse Club. This is when Walt Disney's World of Color began, which is a popular Sunday night show which Walt Disney began to use to promote his new theme park called Disneyland. Walt claimed that the idea of Disneyland came to him while watching his two daughters ride the carousel in LA's Griffith Park. There, he began to imagine a clean, safe, and friendly place where parents and children could have fun together. Determined to make his dream a reality, Walt began to come up with ways to make it happen. In 1952, Walt liquidated some of his assets, including the family's vacation home, and took out $100,000 against his life insurance policy. And though he had spent more than a quarter century building the brand behind his movie studio, Disney even sold the rights to his own name to Walt Disney Productions. And with this money, he funded an entire new venture called WED Enterprises, which stood for his initials of Walter Elias Disney. In mid-1953, Roy was able to negotiate a deal with ABC Television Network, and here's what it was. Disney was going to produce a weekly 1-hour television show for the network, and ABC would put up $5 million to build the new park. Construction on the Anaheim Park began on July 22nd, 1954, which left less than a year before the opening date that Walt Disney had already advertised on ABC. So things went fast and furious, and July 17th, 1955, Disneyland Park opened. And it was not great. Some even called the opening of the $17 million park a disaster. To start, Disneyland's opening day was invite only and wasn't meant for the public. Tickets were mailed out and were only for specific guests, which included employee, friends, and family members, celebrities, and the press. But counterfeit tickets were quickly spread, and instead of the 15,000 people that were initially expected on the park's opening day, 28,000 people entered the park that day. There were morning tickets and afternoon tickets. The guests who held the morning tickets didn't leave at 2:30 p.m. when they were supposed to, so it was packed. Not only that, one man decided to make some money off the Disney blunder and set up a ladder outside of the park fence and charged $5 per person to climb over it and sneak into the park. Because of the crazy amount of people, the guests completely wiped out the park's food and drink supply within a few hours. Not only that, the park was not physically in shape to take on all these guests. Workmen were still planting trees, and in some areas, paint was wet to the touch. The asphalt on Main Street, USA, that had recently been poured was so soft that the spiked heels on women's shoes sank in. It was 100 degrees out that day, which did not help. It was rough. Because of how quick the construction timeline was, the rides kept breaking down or were just not ready to go yet. Rides like Peter Pan's Flight, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Dumbo, they weren't open or kept breaking down. And the Mark Twain riverboat sank twice. And a gas leak almost destroyed Sleeping Beauty's castle. So all around, it was not a great day. Now, despite its rocky start, I think this was one of the best choices Walt Disney ever made, because Disneyland expanded over time and a second park was built along with Walt Disney World in Florida and many parks around the world. But Walt Disney World in Florida opened after Walt Disney's death, and his brother Roy made sure that the Disney legacy continued. Walt was the visionary and Roy was the money behind it. So it was pretty cool how that happened. Now let's get to the spooky things. You might not know this, but Disneyland has its own spooky history. There have been many reports of paranormal activity throughout the park. So is the happiest place on Earth truly haunted? Or are these just a bunch of urban legends passed from cast member to cast member? Let's get into it. If you're well-versed in Disney history, you know that there's an apartment above the firehouse on Main Street in Disneyland. Walt Disney wanted a place to stay on property that would be convenient when he was there late nights or had an early morning start. So the apartment was built, and as a tribute to the main man himself, a light was always left on. Or was it? One day, a cast member who was taking care of the apartment went to shut the light off before leaving. However, when she came back later, she noticed the light was on. She turned it off and went back downstairs and noticed it was back on again. So she went back upstairs and unplugged the lamp and then went back downstairs. And then she noticed the light was on once again, even with the lamp unplugged. One version of the story even says that she heard a whisper say, "I'm still here." Following that event, the light was always left on in the apartment as a tribute to Walt. One of the most popular paranormal tales involves a spirit by the name of Dolly. In 1984, a woman named Regina Young, also known as Dolly, was riding the very popular Matterhorn ride when she fell from the bobsled and was struck by another bobsled on the track and was killed. Now, it's typical for a ride attendants to walk the track at the end of the night to check for lost items and such. But employees now report an uneasy feeling during these walks as if they're being watched throughout the ride. The area on the track where Regina died is known as Dolly's Dip. Another reportedly haunted location in Disneyland is the Haunted Mansion. Shocker. Legend has it that a grieving mother wanted to spread her son's ashes on the ride, and she did. And since then, a young boy has been seen and heard crying for his mother at the end of the ride. Now, let's be clear, you cannot do this. Don't spread your loved one's ashes in Disneyland or Disney World or at any theme park. They will stop the ride and clean it out. Just don't do it. Now, a ghost named George reportedly haunts Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland, and he does not like to be ignored. Cast members have reported that to keep George happy, they have to say good morning and good night to him. Otherwise, the ride will experience all kinds of issues and break down throughout the day. Also, did you know that the skeletons in the ride were actually real at one point? Imagineers worked with UCLA Medical Center to get real skeletons for the ride in the early days. Supposedly, the real skeletons were replaced with fake ones at one point, but still. Another haunted ride in Disneyland is apparently Space Mountain, which has 2 resident spirits lingering around the ride. One of the reported spirits is called Mr. One Way. He manifests as a red-haired man with a red face, and he is known to hang out in the queue for the ride as well as on the ride, sitting in any available seats he can find and then disappearing before the ride ends. Another Space Mountain spirit is known as Disco Debbie, and she has reportedly been seen as a glowing green figure riding on the ride on several occasions. And finally, the creepiest ride, but secretly one of my favorites, It's a Small World. Legend has it that some of the cast members are still lingering around the ride even after they've left. And the dolls, apparently, continue to move and sing even when the electricity is off. Absolutely not. Now let's discuss a few of the deaths that have occurred at Disneyland. Many people say that if something happens to you at the park, you won't be pronounced dead there, but rather off property. But is that really true? Several deaths have occurred on property, including that of a 19-year-old man named Thomas Guy. In 1966, Thomas was trying to sneak into Disneyland for grad night. He climbed the perimeter fence and went on to the monorail track. One of the security guards tried to warn him to get down, but he was struck by an oncoming monorail and dragged for 30 to 40 feet. These days, a shadowy figure has been seen prowling around the monorail track at night and disappears whenever one of the monorails comes by. This next story is devastating. In 1974, 18-year-old Deborah Stone was working at the America Sings attraction in Disneyland. America Sings was a show that highlighted the musical history of the first 200 years of the United States. It used to be the Carousel of Progress and is housed in a rotating theater. On the evening of July 8th, Deborah, who had only worked at Disneyland for a little over a month, was tasked with being a hostess for the evening shift. At the end of the 10:30 p.m. show, during the 45-second interval in which the audience departs and the stage moves into a position to start a new cycle, one of the other guests heard a scream. He turned and saw someone being pulled in between the moving walls and the stationary wall. He was able to get one of the cast members' attention, who rushed over to the area and made the discovery that Deborah had been crushed between the walls and was killed. News of the young woman's death quickly spread throughout the park, and her parents were notified. Deborah had called her parents earlier that night and asked them if it was okay if she got married. She had just gotten engaged, and her parents were then tasked with notifying her new fiancé of her death. Although her parents didn't blame Disneyland for what happened, they did file a lawsuit against the company, which was settled. Following Deborah's death, new safety features were installed on the ride to prevent another accident from occurring. A safety light was added that would alert someone if they were getting too close to the danger area, and solid walls were replaced with breakaway ones to prevent anyone else from being trapped in between them. Deborah was a really strong swimmer, and following her death, her high school renamed their pool after her in remembrance. Poor Deborah. I just can't imagine. And her poor parents. And that is going to do it for episode 100 of The Haunted Corner. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Thank you so much for your continued support of the show. It truly means the world to me. I'm so excited for the next 100 episodes, and I hope you'll stay on this ride with me. The sources for today's episode will be listed on the blog post for the episode at www.thehauntedcorner.com. That's also going to be linked to in the show notes for you. Check out the other episodes of The Haunted Corner, available now wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, with new episodes dropping every Monday and Thursday. If you're enjoying the podcast and would like to share your support, head over to Patreon. You'll have access to the Patreon exclusive episodes, early and ad-free access to episodes, plus a lot more. Head over to patreon.com/The Haunted Corner to join now. Follow us on social media if you haven't already at The Haunted Corner on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to tell a friend, share your favorite episode with a friend. And if you have a case suggestion or a correction to share, send it to me at thehauntedcorner@gmail.com or submit it through the website. Until next time, be kind and take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you soon. Bye.